welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello to all our lovely listeners out there, and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page with the Syosset Public Library. I am one of your two illustrious hosts today. My name is Kay, and I am one of the Reader Services librarians here at the library. My job is basically to put a book into your hands, and that's all I really do. And I'm joined today by my colleague Jessica, who can introduce herself.
Yes, hi, I'm Jessica. I am community engagement specialist slash head of media, and I'm really excited to be here today.
We are both super excited because we're joined by a very special guest whom we've had on the show before, but we're very excited to see again. Today, we're here to talk about his newest cookbook, his baking cookbook. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, now's your time to shine.
Hello there, everyone. I am B. Dylan Hollis. Very happy to be back on the podcast. We're here talking bakery, cookery, all things vintage recipes. And I'm also here to talk about my new cookbook coming out May 20th, Baking Across America. I feel it's very aptly named.
I agree with that. We got a copy, advanced copy today, actually in the mail. We were so lucky to get it. So I have a copy here with me and I flipped through it very briefly. I got to say right off the bat, I am so thrilled with the America aspect of this book that you've gone to all of these different states. The photography alone, phenomenal. Do you want to talk more about that?
Oh my goodness, an undertaking. When you flip through cookbooks, published, well, sort of from the start of time, not really, at least the start of when they had cameras, they've been done in studios, under studio lighting, and things are very controlled. You've got a food stylist. So with a title like Baking Across America, we had to get rather ambitious, and we knew we couldn't just speak about this from a studio or, in my apartment. We were on the road shooting these baked goods. I mean, on the sidewalk, we were baking them up in Airbnbs. So, I mean, we hit at least half of the states and DC. We couldn't go all over the country, but I mean, it was intense. We shot this over an entire summer. You had mentioned our photographer, Mackenzie Smith Kelly, an incredibly talented photographer. And I don't know how we pulled it off, but we did. It was kind of like a journalistic travelogue. But yeah, there are pictures of me in there. We were carrying Boston cream pie through the streets of Boston. We were in Savannah, Georgia, taking pictures of, hush puppies right there by the river. It was great.
So I think that one of the first things I wanted to ask, and I know Kay and I discussed this before we started the meeting, was how this book or how the whole idea behind this book differs from baking yesteryear, because your TikTok channel and everything really just blossomed, but it was during a time when everybody was kind of inside, and now we're getting out into the world. So I'd love to know how baking yesteryear grew to baking across America.
Well, if anyone is familiar with my videos, and it seems unfortunately you folks are, I can be pretty loud and annoying. But yeah, they focused on recipes from yesterday. I mean, it was in the name. The name of my first cookbook really reflected what I do online. And we would go through and find the wild, wacky, and wonderful recipes. Those are my three W's. I love anything that's wild, anything that's wacky, and if it's wonderful too on top of that, that's great. And I would upload them, and I would do taste tests, I would record the process, but inevitably I would stumble across a recipe that was famous from a certain place. Take, for example, the gooey butter cake from St. Louis, Missouri. A fantastic old school recipe. And I remember recording a recipe for that in TikTok, I want to say back in 2021. And I uploaded it, and I expected the usual comments of, oh, that looks so good. Not sure how that would work, but I didn't get those comments, not from that video. I got people who were like, this is the pride of my city. This is the pride of St. Louis. You have done my state proud. And there was a little click in my mind. I was like, whoa, that's very interesting. I mean, people were talking about this recipe, which is just a dessert, a good one, but it's just a dessert. But people were treating it like it was a celebrity, like it was a hero returned home. And I realized very quickly that there was a certain type of pride behind recipes from even where you folks are. You know, there might be a bakery, there might be a specialized baked good that you are just obsessed with, and that can be from a state, that can be from a city, or even a small little neighborhood. You know, if we're talking St. Louis, there's also something called, uh, toasted ravioli, which is like fried, and that's very small, but people are very happy about that, and they want to show that. They're proud of it. So that's kind of how we got the idea. If we think sort of, if we zoom out, I like cookbooks that aren't structured just from like appetizers, main course, desserts. I'm not going to say it's overplayed, but maybe I might suggest or posit that it is. And I like to read them. Let's just say everyone likes lists. I like lists. I like things organized in cool little journeys within a journey. So Baking Yesteryear was structured by the decades, and we started from ye old 19 aughts right the way up to the 80s. And wouldn't it be a learned adventure, I asked to myself, if we did it state by state, highlighting these, wonderful recipes from little cities, or even quirky ones, or even some ones that aren't so good. And then we structured that in a road trip. And you're right, to go back to your original point, Jessica, it mirrored how, like, yes, we couldn't do something like baking across America in COVID times. It's impossible. So let's celebrate, what is good in America, which is sugar and butter and eggies, as I like to say.
That brings me to my next question, actually. So I had, like I said, the extraordinary pleasure of flipping through the book earlier today. And Jessica and I are located in New York. So I immediately flipped straight to the New York section, the Mid-Atlantic section. And I went a little too far and I was like, oh, there's a recipe from New Jersey in here. There's only one recipe from New Jersey in here. There's four recipes from New York. I'm so happy. I'm very excited about that. But I'm curious, how come some, not to like, make a rivalry between states or anything like that, but how did you go about deciding like, oh, well, this state only has like one recipe that's really very fabulous, so we'll do that. But like New York has three recipes that are very fabulous and one that I'm eyeballing a little side eye about, which is, I forget the name off the top of my head, but it's one of those gelatin infused
Oh,
potential
yes.
disasters, but not always a disaster when you make it. So how did you go about like picking these ones and picking which state got to have four? Like us, we're so
It's
lucky.
It is. It's an interesting question. And, there's 100 recipes in the book, and we all know there aren't 100 states, at least not yet, maybe in the year 3282. But it mirrors the age. Doesn't mirror, but it's influenced by the age of the states. If you look at the history of the United States, everything starts on the east from, way back. And then as you go westward, the great go west, things get younger. Things get very young. You look at the town where I'm in right now, Laramie, Wyoming. It only came about when the railroad came through. So we don't have that gilded history of a state like New York. You think of New York, that is the landing point of all of the forebears, all of the forefathers and mothers who are in the United States currently, really, if we're talking about the history of Western culture. Of course, uh, when I always find it funny how they say the United States was discovered. Never mind the fact that people were well here. But if we're looking at Western history and recorded cookbook history, New York is the state where all of that stuff landed. So even New York City is such a melting pot, an overused term, but it is a melting pot of all of these recipes. And yeah, you had mentioned, I believe you're speaking about the Waldorf salad from the
One of those. I could flip through and find it, but I think it is called like I think it's the Stase Waldorf salad or something, or Waldorf Stas. I think
yes,
I'm
on
pronouncing it probably horrifically and I apologize.
no, no, I mean, the Waldorf Astoria is a hotel of renown in New York, and that's where a lot of cool recipes originated. They say the red velvet came out of the Waldorf Astoria, and the Waldorf salad did too. Now, in the 20th century, people got all sort of riled up about, I called them armchair explorers, you know, Probably the same type of people who would say that the United States was discovered, but they would get all fancy and they would name things, give, regular recipes names like French names or like, coq au vin or all of these fancy things. So they took the Waldorf salad, which is just, it's not a gelatin mold, but it's a salad of sort of, creaminess. You've got mayonnaise, you've got whipped cream, you've got walnuts and apples. And then they decided to make that into a mold. So en Waldorf en literally means in stasis, which is, encased in gelatin. So, long story short, states with great history, great meaning like a long history, get a lot of them. And then you go to a state like, Wyoming. Whew, that's hard. That's hard if you're only looking at baked goods. So I had to get rather inventive there.
One of the things I also wanted to just mention before we talk about things like Wyoming, because I am curious about what you found there. You made me I got a full disclosure, I got a press release. Kay is lucky enough to have the physical book, but I was looking through the press release and talk about classics. You have the Toll House cookies. I always saw the recipe for the Toll House cookies on the back of the Nestle, semi-sweet chocolate chips. And I guess I never really realized it was an actual place at one time. I thought it was just the like apocryphal. So, were there any gems that you kind of stumbled upon like that while you were writing this book and while you were researching it?
Yeah, the Toll House Inn. I mean, it was never a toll house, a place where you paid your tolls, but it was a rest stop, along a road called the Old Stage Road. And there, the story of, oh my goodness, the person in the kitchen at the Toll House Inn, wanted to add chocolate and used a Hershey's chocolate bar, and of course chopped it all up, and they failed to melt completely. And they gave rise to the chocolate chip cookie. What many people don't realize is the chocolate chip as a product itself was invented specifically because of that recipe. That so it's one of long legend. And now look at the chocolate chip. I say it's one of the most important recipes to come out of the United States because everyone on the globe knows about it. It's like the de facto cookie. But yeah, there were lots of gems, things that are made in little, bakeries that you wouldn't expect. Um, Take, for example, if you go to California, if you go to like Palm Springs or any state with a significant sort of population from the South, you'll find these wonderful little pink sugar cookies called polvorones rosas, which are little pink sugar cookies. And for some reason, the way that they make them, the fact that they're, a shortening cookie, and I swear they taste better simply because they're dyed pink. So I love little gems like that. And then there are gems that needed some thinking about. You mentioned Wyoming and you're curious about that. In Wyoming, we don't have much in the ways of like fresh produce or stuff like that. We've got plenty of buffalo, plenty of bison, but nothing really to bake with. However, we have a terrible little bush called a choke cherry, which produce these very bitter, acrid, horrible pit to flesh ratio fruits that you can't do anything with but make jams or jellies out of. So any old time Wyomingite, you'll go into their kitchens. Yes, you'll go into their kitchens, and they've just got jars. I mean, it's like they're prepared for doomsday. They're jars of choke cherry jam, and an old-timey way to sweeten muffins, cakes, and things like this are to use jams as a portion rather, of the sugar content. So choke cherry homestead muffins are a recipe from Wyoming that utilize that. So it's not been easy getting some of these states, but it's been very rewarding and fulfilling.
Now, full disclosure, I may have gotten the book today, but I've not really read the book. I've just been flipping through it. And I am just curious as a fan of your TikTok. In fact, I think you were like one of the first accounts I followed when I joined. I think I saw like one of your videos on like a YouTube compilation and was like, this guy's silly. I like him. Easy enough. Easy enough decision. Do any of your catchphrases wind up in the book? Or did you come up with any new catchphrases while you were traveling around the States? For those who don't know, he's very well known for saying things like eggy and
Yes.
cinnamon when he's cooking on TikTok. And it has made it into the vernacular of many a friend of mine that they know that when I say something like that, they're like, that video. So I'm just curious about that.
And it is a curious sort of, I wouldn't call it a phenomenon. I think those things need to be more special, but it is a phenomenon how like, you know, sometimes the focus when I meet someone and they're talking about what I do, focus isn't so much on the recipes or this, that, and the other in that respect, but on the way I butcher the names of certain ingredients. So, you know, I've had some people, you know, yell across the street from me, eggy. And I'm like, my goodness gracious. Now, whether or not things like that find their way into cookbooks, I did it in the first one, but there's this interesting thing when you're dealing with, you know, publishers and editors and cookbooks, whereby what if someone picks up the cookbook who doesn't know my online presence? So these books are in, you know, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstores and all of that. So say someone picks that up and they're scrolling through the ingredients list and I've replaced every instance of egg with eggy. Could you imagine their reaction? They're like, "Is something wrong with this man? Well, I don't know. Where do you buy an eggy? You know, floof powder? What is that? I don't know what that is." So initially, yeah, I was like, "Oh my goodness, we need to put this in the book. This is what I say. This is how I refer to these things." And then we had to take a step back, and we had to say, you know, publishing cookbooks, we need to be truthful to that. So yes, of course, some of those things do sneak their way in. I'm not going to spoil it, but that's some of what needs to be taken into account. And the process of transferring sort of what you do online to in a book does mean there's things to think about that you wouldn't have thought about initially.
Hmm. Maybe we need an author's preferred text version that has all the weird things with like little notes of you freaking out at certain like steps, being like, I always show people when I tell people, so I had to tell a lot of people today, like, oh, I'm interviewing this guy, he does TikTok things, but he published 2 beautiful cookbooks, which is true. And they were like, he's online, like, what has he done? So I would pull up like a video, and one of my favorite ones is, I think it's like the peanut butter potato cookie, the candy rather, that you made ages ago, where it's like
Yeah.
one giant russet potato and you do whatever you do with it. I'm totally blanking. I'm butchering this story already.
No,
But
you're not. That's exactly what it is.
you get to a point where the recipe's like, now you add 6 cups of powdered sugar and you turn around and you go, cups?
Yeah.
6 to 8, 6 is on the low end. And I obviously I know it verbatim, silly. But like maybe that's the next cookbook you need to make, is something to do with like making the whole thing silly and adding, like, not that this is not fun, but adding the more TikTokification of, you know,
Yeah.
your recipes,
The wild and wacky
the
version.
wild and wacky version. That is also wonderful because it is very fun.
Yes.
B. Dylan Hollis Unleashed. Triple W, the triple W version.
The triple W
Yes.
version.
As a rating, have an ESRB rating of triple W.
That would be really fun. Back to baking across America. We do get to see a lot of really wonderful pictures and beautiful anecdotes of your travels across the states. Do you have a particularly fun travel story that you're willing to share with us before people read the book?
There's a few. I go back to Boston. We mentioned it already. And I remember we flew into Boston. You know, we really wanted to hit home the fact that we baked these things on location and we shot these things on location. So I mean, we flew into Boston with our suitcases filled with baking supplies. We went to the Airbnb and we started baking the Boston cream pie. And I mean, it was done. And I emerged from the street with the Boston cream pie, and we were taking pictures and we were walking through. And if you know the Freedom Trail in Boston, they've got these wonderful little brass medallions encased in the sidewalks. Um, and I was, you know, shooting there on I was laid out on the sidewalk, and this tour bus comes by and stops. I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And the tour operator, over his loudspeaker microphone, which can broadcast outside, was like, Are you B. Dylan Hollis? And I look up in the streets of Boston. I mean, it's 1 hour until rush hour, and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and is that a Boston cream pie on the sidewalk? And and I was, why, yes, it is. So that things like that happened all through baking across America. I mean, we encountered a bear in Grand Teton National Park, which we were very glad. I mean, we had to bear-proof our supplies. You can get like little bags that hide the scent of everything, and we like triple bag these things. And we were carrying around baked goods in a national park, and that was reflected through all of the states that we traveled through. In Jackson Hole, Wyoming, we were preparing to make a buttercream frosting later down the line, and I of course had 2 pounds, 2 pounds of powdered sugar in my bag. And TSA doesn't take too lightly to sort of, white powders. So I had had my bag searched and, testing for illicit substances. And I said, I promise I just travel with powdered sugar. It's a normal everyday thing.
I also have to mention, while looking at the pictures and, everything I'd gotten beforehand, I wrote, I am so hungry, in my notebook, and there are 8 O's. And so,
Oh, that's a lot of O's.
yeah,
Wow.
that is on my scale of how hungry the book made me. It made me 8 O's of hungry. Uh, but pivoting back to what you were talking about with, shooting and cooking in Airbnbs, was it like, did you have to kind of have someone scope out the location first? Because, I would imagine just kind of walking into a new kitchen in each state and being like, here's where I'm going to cook could be a bit disorienting.
And it was. It really was. And then there were some instances where, the Airbnb had an oven that didn't quite work as well, and we had to redo a few of these recipes. But yeah, there was a lot of planning that went into it. We knew that, say, when we were going to be in a metropolitan center, that we wanted to be in the thick of it, in the heart of it. So, I mean, we were in an Airbnb in Montgomery, Alabama, and we made the lane cake, completely messed the kitchen up. Half of our time there was spent cleaning up the boiled frosting for that lane cake. But we picked that location because we knew we could walk the lane cake right there to the Alabama State Capitol. And, I knocked on the door there and the governor wasn't in. No one legislative was there. I said, look, I made you a lane cake, but no one was there. But we shot on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol, but there was some disorienting aspects about it. If we go back to sort of shooting in the national parks in Yellowstone, for example, there are no Airbnbs there. So me and my baking assistant, which is just my friend from college, Kaylee Stalder, traveled with us and helped me get the ingredients lists beforehand and helped me in the kitchen. We had to bake these things and pack them in our suitcases before we even got there and hope that they survived. So yeah, there was push and pull, and there was pivoting on the heel, which was nerve-wracking because by the end of these trips, we needed to have a cookbook shot, but we just knew, it's adventurous. And I feel that when you're put on the spot, when you have to make those decisions, if you're in the right place, you've got the right mindset, you're going to have a beautiful result. And we did. Blood, sweat, and tears, of course, but we did.
I've never had to hide baked goods from a bear or traipse through a national park with them in my back pocket or anything. But I did get stopped at TSA once for also having white powders in a bag. I was bringing home, I went to Kentucky.
Ooh.
Fabulous. Loved being there in Louisville. And I was coming home with pancake mix that was like made with like bourbon, maple, whatever nonsense.
Yeah.
And they stopped me on the way back and they were like, we have to look through this. And I was like, it's mixed from the store. Like I bought it
Yeah.
and they have to look through it all. It's so wild.
There's bourbon in there, but nothing else,
Bourbon.
nothing
Yeah.
else crazy.
I'll be chugging that on the plane ride home, right?
You need a lot of water.
I'm curious if you have any future baking plans. Is there a third book in you? Are we getting maybe like a cooking show at some point in the future? Are you just going to stick to TikTok, which is perfectly fine? I love when they come up on my feed. I'm not complaining at all. I'm just, what are you looking forward to now?
Well, I've been asking myself this question. I said, is it normal for someone to really enjoy and still find it fascinating? One very niche concept of baking from old cookbooks. You know, I said, is that normal? Do I need to branch out? Do I need to do what the people do? And do I need to go to Los Angeles, California, and, start driving flashy cars and looking at myself in the mirror too much? But no, I'm, you know, you folks are deeply engrossed in books and libraries and written word, whether it's instructions on making something or novels or novellas or nonfiction. And if you start getting into books, it's not like you're going to read them all and you're going to be like, oh, it's time to move on. So it's the same way with old community cookbooks. I just got a few in today. This one is from St. Louis, Missouri, and it's a community church cookbook from 1979 from the Women's Day Fellowship of the St. Lucas United Church of Christ in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm going through it. And I said, that there's things in this cookbook that I've never heard of. And it makes me realize that there are so many recipes out there that I just want to keep doing it so long as there's interest from folks. There's interest from me to continue doing it because it's still very fulfilling to me. And to answer the question, I still want to write books. I still want to upload these videos, and I'm just going to ride the wave as long as it's going, and it's still cresting. So I'm enjoying that. I can drop the fact that baking across America, I'm happy to share with you. This might be the first time I've shared it, but I recorded it as an audiobook too. We took out the ingredients and the method, and still it was like 35,000 words. So and I narrated it, and so we tell the tale of baking from coast to coast. So that was a new venture. So I'm excited for that. But no, we've got a tour. I've got a tour for this cookbook upon release where I'm going to be across the country again. So my focus is kind of myopic. It's kind of nearsighted. I think after that, I might sleep for a week. It's a month-long tour. And then I'll be thinking of what comes next. But it's probably going to be maybe another unhinged Jello mold on TikTok and social media. But yeah.
Well, I and many people like me who enjoy your videos are looking forward to whatever insanity you do next in your lovely kitchen. And now we have to tell the person who's in charge of ordering our e-audiobooks that they must get the audiobook so that I can listen to it.
Yes.
That sounds like a great time. That sounds like so much fun. So I think that brings us to the end of this wonderful afternoon we've just had. Is there anything else you'd like to shout out before we sign off?
I just wanted to give my sincere thanks for you folks thinking of me with this again.
It's a pleasure as always,
It
and maybe
really
we'll
is.
welcome you back for the next thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Keep coming back whenever you want. You just shoot us an email.
Fantastic. I will hold you to that.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, B. Dylan Hollis. And thank you, everyone listening today. Please go out and get this book either from your favorite local bookstore or your favorite local library. We already have our copy here, so we're set. And as always, have a great afternoon to everyone out there. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.